Joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, Slate senior editor and the host of the Amicus podcast, and also an MSNBC law and politics analyst Dahlia Lithwick, and New York Times opinion columnist David French. And Lisa, let's break down for just a moment this DOJ complaint, talking about how that Boasberg has made these comments and that it potentially has compromised him as far as being impartial on the bench.
They have said in this complaint, which was signed by Chad Mizell, he's the chief of staff to Attorney General Bondi, that on March 11th at a working breakfast at the Judicial Conference of the United States, that's an annual gathering at which designated judges gather to decide business relevant to the federal judiciary, that at this breakfast, Boasberg made some comments that he was concerned about the administration's compliance with court orders. He did so, according to this letter, in front of Chief Justice Roberts, who, according to some other reporting, pushed back and said, that's not really a concern that I have right now. I think that they have been very polite and solicitous to the judiciary. But according to the letter, they say that this violates certain canons of judicial ethics, and that in particular, Judge Boasberg was trying to influence Chief Justice Roberts as well as other judges in the federal judiciary. And as a result of that, they have asked Judge Srinivasan, the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit, to open an investigation and to take a number of steps, including potentially reprimanding Judge Boasberg or assigning another judge to the Alien Enemies Act case, and the worst of all, to consider recommending him for impeachment, which is the only way that a federal judge with lifetime tenure, Ariel, can be on what you call the firing line.
Yeah, and not necessarily talking about just bias, but also influence, as you mentioned, over other judges and potentially lawmakers who were in the room as well. Dahlia, federal judges are usually barred from making out of court, public comments about impending matters. Would these remarks then qualify under that?
It's hard to see how. This is a closed-door meeting, as Lisa said. This is the Judicial Conference, which is a body that is supposed to service exactly these sorts of questions. This is, at least allegedly, from what the reporting shows, Judge Boasberg actually giving voice to concerns, not only that other judges around the country had, but giving voice to concerns that were, in fact, made true only days later when his court order was violated. So the notion that he was working to undermine the integrity or the esteem of the judiciary, something that he clearly was not doing in public, and he is, I should say, incredibly careful. Generally, he is not an intemperate person. So this is him doing exactly what he was meant to do in, I think, a way that was trying to amplify concerns around the judiciary, the notion that he was trying to influence an Article III tenured Chief Justice of the United States, or in some way speaking in a way that would allow the public to have less esteem for the judiciary. The only reason the public might have less esteem for the judiciary is because of this complaint.
David, this new complaint is the second time that the DOJ has demanded Boasberg be removed from the Alien Enemies Act case. It's also calling for him to be reprimanded publicly. And on top of that, raises the prospects that, other judges here could call for his impeachment. Does this sound personal to you, and does this feel normal?
Well, no, it is absolutely not normal. And it's very personal. But it's very personal regarding Donald Trump. So the way this is working with the Trump administration in his second term is that everything is personal for him. Ruling against him is a personal affront to him, an attack on him, an attack on his legitimacy, on his authority. And so absolutely, you're seeing the Trump DOJ, you're seeing the Trump administration largely at large, essentially saying, look, if you're opposing me, if you're concerned about me, if you're expressing concern about me, there's something inherently illegitimate about this. There's something inherently problematic about this. This immediately labels you as an enemy. And if there's one thing that this administration was elected to do was to have vengeance on Trump's enemies. And so constantly you see the same pattern. Trump's friends enjoy all of the benefits and largesse that the president of the United States can offer. Trump's enemies get the boot. They get the full force of the law, and they'll even get the law extended beyond its bounds, its rightful bounds, in this effort to take on Trump's enemies. This is all consistent with everything that's been happening since day one of this new Trump administration.
Lisa, Boasberg has been assigned to several notable cases that deal with the Trump administration's policies, including the Alien Enemies Act. What would his reassignment on something like this look like, and what does that say to you?
I think, first of all, I think that they have asked only for his reassignment with respect to one particular case. But the way that it would work if it were to happen, and I think that's a big if, is that the case would simply be taken away from him and assigned to another judge in the District of D.C., which is the federal body on which he serves. But I want to go back to the gravamen of the complaint, because in order to even get to the investigative stage, there are a bunch of thresholds that have to be met. The person who makes the complaint has to sign it and swear to it under penalty of perjury. They have to provide documentation. There is an attachment to this. It is apparently somebody's memo about what was said at this meeting. But again, it's not clear at all that Chad Mizell, who signed this complaint, was in the meeting, or that they have any witnesses that they've identified who were present in the meeting. There's a lot that has to be done here to even substantiate that Boasberg said what he is alleged to have said, notwithstanding the fact that, as Dahlia also said, when these judges get together once a year, these closed-door meetings are an opportunity for them to speak privately about concerns that they have relevant to judicial business. I don't know that this was, in fact, a public statement the way that the complaint expresses it to be.
So even if the judge said something about Trump prompting a constitutional crisis, would that fall in bounds in a meeting like that behind closed doors with other judges?
It depends on how he said it and what was said. But again, what they're alleging is not just that he said it, but that it was an improper attempt to influence the decision-making of other judges. On the time that he said it, he's alleged to have said this on March 11th, several days before his first order and the Alien Enemies Act case. But at that time, there were already cases in which noncompliance was very much an issue. I'll refer you back to the the OMB funding freeze cases, which was one of the first kind of court battles of this new administration, where OMB was directed by the president to stop certain funding streams. And that was challenged in a variety of courts, where courts ruled for the people who were suing. And yet the states and others who are plaintiffs kept going back to those courts saying, I don't see any evidence that they're complying with your order, Your Honor. They need more clarification from you. So at that time that Judge Boasberg said that, that was not just an ephemeral fear. That was something that we were already seeing taking place in other judicial districts of the country, in that OMB funding freeze case and others.
Okay, so David, what does this all say to you, attacking judges? What does it say to you? I know you wrote recently about the fact that the DOJ may be going after the Civil Rights Division as well. Can you just expand on that for us?
Yeah, we saw recently a case involving the killing of Breonna Taylor back in 2020, where one of the officers who had been convicted by a jury of violating her civil rights by firing multiple rounds, unaimed rounds, into her apartment on that terrible night when she was killed, they were seeking a one-day jail sentence or a one-day prison sentence for this police officer who had been convicted of violating civil rights. And we'd seen already the situation where Trump is taking vengeance on his personal enemies, and he's providing advantages for his personal allies, such as the January 6th protesters and rioters that he pardoned and granted clemency to. But this is beginning to get more categorical. You're seeing categorical mistreatment of immigrants, for example. In this case, you began to see categorical, and you're beginning to see from the DOJ categorical favoritism towards police officers. This is getting upside down to what the Civil Rights Division was supposed to do. One of the reasons for the Civil Rights Acts was to protect innocent Americans from violations of their civil rights from agents of the state. And here the Civil Rights Division was trying to protect an agent of the state after he committed a civil rights violation against an unarmed Black American who was in her own home. And so this is just turning everything on its head. And it's not just personal friends and personal loyalists to Trump who get advantages. It's categories of people that Trump is courting and that are considered sort of part of that MAGA base, or part of the people that MAGA is seeking to protect. And this is a complete perversion of what the DOJ is supposed to be.
Dahlia, last one to you. There's also news, of course, that we're getting about Emil Bovee on the bench and forcing Alina Habba into a U.S. attorney role in New Jersey. Does all of this just come down to the Trump administration in a way, knowing it will not have to face true accountability on multiple fronts here? You've touched on this in some of your recent podcasts.
I mean, I would say, and this is just to sort of lift up what David just said, what we are seeing is an attack on checks and balances at every single level, right? The Alina Habba story is not just about taking away the Senate's prerogative to confirm and the judges in New Jersey's prerogative to seat a U.S. attorney when the interim's time runs out. It's just a systematic dismantling of every possible check. And you're exactly right. I think where the buck stops, and this is what's really chilling, is it looks more and more like an attempt to say there can be no accountability because we're kicking out the legs under the stool of every single checkable institution. And that really starts to reek of an administration that doesn't think that they can be removed in the next elections. That's the fear, and that's the thing we're going to have to sort of man up and figure out how to work through. They think there's no accountability. It's kind of on us to figure out how to make sure that's not right.